Washington Journal continues.
Welcome back to Washington Journal. We're joined now by Vance Ginn. He is former chief economist and Office of Management and Budget under the Trump administration. He's also founder and president of Ginn Economic Consulting. He joins us to talk about President Trump's economic policies. Vance, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So tell us about your background first and what your role was during the first Trump administration.
Sure. I was the chief economist, also known as the official title was Associate Director for Economic Policy at the Office of Management and Budget in the first Trump administration, kind of like the last year, June 2019 to May 2020. I've also worked in a lot of public policy and think tank area for over a decade now, working on many issues at the state, local, and federal level. Recently came out with a book called Empower Patients, so I'm also working on healthcare policy, just a number of different areas. But at the end of the day, I'm an economist, I'm a dad, and a husband, and those are the types of things that I really enjoy.
So I want to start with the latest numbers, the inflation numbers. Axios with the headline, Key Consumer Price Index Gauge Rises. What's the takeaways from those latest numbers for you?
Well, when you look at inflation and growing about 2.7% over the last year for overall headline CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is a good measure of the basket of goods and services that the urban people pay across the country. It's what the Fed looks at. It's what other folks in the government like to look at. So that's up quite a bit. When you look at, and it has moderated some, it was up 9% back in 2022, so it's only up 2.7, but that means it's still increasing. Prices are still increasing. If you exclude food and energy, which of course we all buy, but happen to be more volatile over time, it's at 3.1%. And so that's about a full percentage point higher than what the Federal Reserve, our central bank, would like it to be, closer to 2% when they look at their flexible average inflation target. And so that shows that inflation is still hot. It's still growing too fast. And especially when you start looking at some of the areas that people spend a lot of money on, like their shelter, that's still growing at a pretty rapid pace. Food has started to go up again as well. And so those are the types of things that I look at and say, okay, the American people have had a tough time during the 4 years of Biden with higher inflation, and it's moderated some, but it's still way too high. And I think that's a combination of excessive government spending by Congress, but also the Federal Reserve printing too much money over a short period of time in the last couple of years, and there's still a lot of liquidity or cash that's flowing across the system. Too much money chasing too few goods, you're going to get higher inflation over time, and that's exactly what we're seeing now.
And have President Trump's tariffs impacted that number, do you think?
Well, when you look at the tariffs, right, and they've been on again and off again. We had the first ones coming in on April 1st, and I guess it was April Fool's Day because they kicked it back a month. But we have seen a 10% across the board tariff on most countries across the globe. And so that does increase the cost of production. When you look at the imports that we have here in the United States, about half of those are intermediate goods that businesses buy, like raw materials, things of that nature, that go into the final production process. And so that will influence a lot of business costs. At the same time, we also have half of them that are final goods, and certain goods in particular, that we buy as American consumers, that we also pay those tariffs. Because we got to remember first that tariffs are taxes, and they're taxes on imports paid by American consumers. We could talk about the burden, how maybe initially some of these businesses, whether it's foreign or domestic, pay for that. But at the end of the day, people pay these taxes, not companies. The last time I saw a business can't pay a tax, it's just a building. It's really the people inside there, the employees, the employer, your shareholder value, things of that nature. So we are seeing those costs throughout the system. But it doesn't necessarily mean, like some would argue, that the inflation measure itself will go up. To me, that only comes from increases in the money supply and the Federal Reserve's excessive monetary or expansionary monetary policy. It doesn't come from the tariff directly, but what you will see are individual prices that have tariffs on them, like steel and aluminum and many other things that we're importing. You have relative price changes versus the overall increase in inflation metrics metrics like the CPI. So I think that's where we're really seeing a lot of the distortions that have taken place from these tariffs that have been put in place by the Trump administration.
Now, I want to ask you about the revenues from tariffs. I heard you say that it's American consumers are paying this money. The Washington Times has an article where it says that Trump tariff revenue jumps to $25 billion monthly as inflation holds steady. Now that's higher. That's up from $7 billion a year ago. So it was $7 billion a year ago. Now it's $25 billion. Will that have an impact on reducing the deficit and improving the economy overall?
Well, when you look at any sort of tax collections, and these are higher taxes that are coming in to the government from these imports paid by Americans, you're going to see that if the spending doesn't increase at the same rate and you have an increase in taxes, then the deficit would necessarily go down. But what we've also seen is that spending is growing at a rapid clip as well. And so we've got to get control of spending, which is the ultimate burden of government on its people. And so what I've seen, and there's some talk about this, like you said, the $25 billion, if you annualize that, make it over a year, we can see $300+ billion of revenue, tax revenue that's collected by the government that's coming in. And that's a massive increase. This is a large increase from prior years because of that 10% tariff. I mean, if you look at the average tariff tax rate that's hitting people now, it's around 15-16% versus before these tariffs were put in place, it was only 2%. So we've seen a substantial increase in these tariff rates overall. But there's also been some discussion about what do you do with this extra money. Some have said giving rebate checks to Americans and sending it back. But I think that would create more dependency on government, having these rebate checks being sent out. Instead, I would rather see the tariffs go away. At some point, I think we need to know what the end game is with the Trump administration. In the first Trump administration, when I was there was a 0-0 policy. 0 tariffs, 0 trade barriers. We were trying to get to some measure of free trade. At least that was what the rhetoric was. Now, I don't hear a lot about that. It almost seems like these tariffs are going to be permanent. That's why they're trying to give tax rebates. That's why they're looking at other ways to either spend the money or send the money back, which indicates that it could be more permanent. And I think that would be a step in the wrong direction. If this is a good idea to do something to get bring the other side to the negotiating table, whether it's China or other countries, then do that. But don't make this a permanent form of taxation. We've got enough taxes to deal with already. And if you think about, well, can it replace the income tax? If it brings in $300 billion a year, or maybe $3 trillion over a decade, if you have that average per year, that sounds like a lot. But you got to remember that income taxes alone bring in about $3 trillion every year. So it's not enough money. It's only about 10% of the amount of income taxes that are coming in. So it's not enough to replace the income taxes. So I'm hopeful that the Trump administration will have used these, get rid of them as quickly as possible, because I think it's distorting the overall economy and a lot of supply lines. And at the end of the day, it also is about control. I mean, American people should be able to buy from whoever they want to buy from and not have the government dictating where those dollars are going.
I want to ask you about interest rates, but before I do, I'll let people know that if you'd like to join our conversation with Vance Ginn about President Trump's economic policies, you can do so. Our lines are by party. Republicans are on 202-748-8001. Independents are on 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. You can start calling in now. Vance, your Substack has this headline, CPI still running hot. The Fed can't afford to cut rates. However, Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, says this on Bloomberg. Bessent urges Fed to lower rates by 150 basis points or more. I want to play you a portion of his comments and then have you respond to that.
I think what we could see is that, first of all, what if the BLS data had been the higher quality and we'd had those numbers, Jonathan? So if we'd seen those numbers in May, in June, I suspect we could have had rate cuts in June and July. So that tells me that there's a very good chance of a 50 basis point rate cut. And I think President Trump is very good at giving these nicknames. And I think the reason that Jay Powell gets the nickname too late is because he wants to go into a series of rate hikes. He's not willing. He's not Alan Greenspan, who was very forward thinking. They try to be more data driven, which I think is a mistake, because I think we are going back into an economy like we had in the 90s. So, it's just very old fashioned thinking. But I do think we could go into a series of rate cuts here, starting with a 50 basis point rate cut in September.
If you could put that into perspective for us, Vance, 150 basis points, what is that drastic?
Well, it is. I mean, currently the federal funds rate, which is the overnight lending rate between banks that the Federal Reserve targets. They don't control interest rates. They target the interest rates with their money supply creation in which assets that they buy, in particular the Treasury securities in this case. And it's the current range that they have it in for that federal funds rate is 4.25 to 4.5%. So if you were to cut it from 4.5% by 1.5 percentage points or 150 basis points, as he mentioned, then you're looking at a 3% federal funds rate. So that's a pretty substantial cut from where it's at today. But I think that's not a good idea at this moment. I mean, it would be great because mortgage rates could come down. The interest rates that are being paid on the treasuries, meaning that on the national debt, which just went over $37 trillion, which is a massive amount. The interest on the debt payments would also go down, which are exceeding about $1 trillion a year right now. So that would be good indications. But that, or a good step in the right direction as far as the Congress goes and our national debt. But really what needs to be done is the cutting spending. Spending is what's mainly driving the national debt over time, the primary driver. And so I think that's really where you should start instead of trying to bring down interest rates. The other thing is that I would kind of go against what Treasury Secretary Bessent said was when you look at the labor market, yes, the labor market is weakening. And I think whether or not the BLS, the numbers are biased or other things are going on, I think there is some truth to that in the sense of not necessarily biased from a political standpoint, but because of the way that they collect the data, the survey responses are down dramatically from where they were even during 2020, during COVID and everything else. You also have some seasonal adjustments. After the Trump lockdowns happened and the economy was shut down, that contributed to years of seasonal base adjustments that have now been biased in different directions. But if you actually look at the trend since 1965 of revisions, and last month there was a this month's jobs report that came out, they revised the previous 2 months by about 260,000 jobs lower, which sounds like a lot. But as a percent of employment, right, and it's well within the margin of error, and those revisions have been going down since 1965 as a percent of employment. And so I don't see that there's a huge concern to be had at this time, even though I do think that there are reasons to improve how we collect those data. And bringing all this together now, though, to answer your question, is that Bessent was talking about the labor market and a reason why the Federal Reserve would be cutting, because the Federal Reserve has this dual mandate of price stability and full employment. They also have some regulatory power and other things that are out there. But the one thing that they can control is inflation. They cannot control the real labor market. And so I would rather them go to a single sort of mandate, which is only on price stability, because that's the only thing they control. They should not be looking as much about the labor market, because then it gets into politics and everything else that the Federal Reserve has no ability to control. So I think it's a bad time to be cutting interest rates. And in fact, if you look at some of the measures that are out there, like the Taylor rule, named after John Taylor, we're right in the sweet spot of where that maybe the natural rate of inflation, or sorry, interest rates would be. And so I don't think there's any reason to be cutting interest rates. And in fact, given the inflation was 3.1% at the core, we're well above the target rate of 2% that the Federal Reserve has for their rate of inflation. And if they wanted a flexible average rate inflation, then really what that means is we need to get below 2% for a while. We've been above 2% now since March of, I believe it was 2021. We've been well above 2%, and it got up to 9%. So for a while, we might actually need to see below 2% inflation before the Fed should start cutting. So I don't want to see what happened during the 1970s, where inflation went up dramatically. It came back down. The Fed put back on the gas pedal, raised and lowered interest rate, increased the money supply, and inflation ran up again. Let's not repeat that this time around.
All right, let's talk to callers. Raymond is on the Republican line, Windsor, Colorado. Good morning.
Well, independent. And not only did you repeat it, you're about to double up on it with these tariffs with another 25% total cumulative inflation rate. So you're kind of playing both sides of the cards here, but you did say the word distorted earlier, which tells me I call it debt bubble collapse, and Ray Dalio, the richest hedge fund manager on the planet, calls it debt demand struggle, basically meaning that not only did the Trump lockdowns, but your boy Biden with his lockdowns printed so much money that you're playing catch up now. That you printed so much money, the spending's through the roof, that no matter what you do, you can raise interest rates by 500%. You can lower them by 500% and go into negative interest rates. If there's no jobs, then there's no transactions, and that's the problem right now. There's no jobs because you guys did I'm an OG MAGA, and OG MAGA is incensed right now what's going on with Trump 2.0. Absolutely incensed. If you're a Trump supporter, you may not want to get on Twitter. So basically, we did this wrong. We did want to do reciprocal trade the first time, but they printed so much money we don't have a choice now but to raise tariffs so high that it forces manufacturing back to the country. And you're not forcing it back. All you're doing is you're putting more taxes, a 15 to 25% increase of cost of living on everybody, which is going to lose even more jobs, which is going to put you in that debt demand struggle and what I've called before everybody, debt bubble collapse. Good luck, everybody.
What do you think, Vance? There's a lot there to take in.
Yeah, there is. And I mean, there's a lot to it in the sense of the debt collapse. And under Biden, which I wasn't a part of that administration at all, but, you know, the Federal Reserve printed a lot of money. Biden, what I would consider overspent from Congress. They had a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, all these other bills that went through, trillions of dollars of new spending went into place. And that put us in a bad situation. And I thought we had a weak labor market then, and the labor market is still weak. I think there are some positive things to look at, though. I think the one big, beautiful bill that was passed had a lot of good things in there of making full expensing permanent, which just means that if a business wants to invest, they can write off that investment this year instead of depreciating it over time. That's going to incentivize or support more investment across the economy. And I think that's a good step. It also made permanent the individual tax cuts. All the tax rates would have expired at the end of this year and had a massive tax increase. And instead, they made those permanent. And so I think that was also a good step. There are some questionable things that are out there about no tax on tips and other things that are going on. And there was some meaningful adjustments to Medicaid and SNAP about work requirements that I think could also start to bend some of the cost curve for the future. But we've still got a major debt problem to the caller's point, but that comes from excessive spending. And so instead of just cutting spending in DC talk of slowing the growth rate of spending compared to what it otherwise would be, which is what happened during the One Big Beautiful Bill, we need to be thinking about real cuts to reducing the amount of government spending, maybe going back to pre-COVID levels. I mean, there was a substantial increase from $4.6 trillion when I was there in the government spend at OMB, what the budget was at $4.6 trillion, to now they're spending $7 trillion. And it's like, okay, where exactly is all this money going? And we've got some major problems when you look at Social Security and Medicare and other things. So trying to raise taxes through tariffs to deal with this, or really any other sort of tax hikes, is not the path forward. It has to get back to some sort of spending restraint. And I've really called for a spending limit. I would like to see the spending grow no more than the average taxpayer's ability to pay for it, which is a population growth plus inflation is a good metric. And that should be a maximum, not a target, but a maximum, to where you have spending grow by less than that. And if we grew the spending by slower amount and had more economic growth, we could really get control over this national debt and fiscal spending crisis that we have in D.C.
Pete in Florida, Independent Line. Good morning, Pete.
Thank you. Yes, so a lot of common sense stuff that you're putting out there in the big, beautiful bill. That's why you had some Republicans standing up against it. But again, I'll just say mostly both sides, but mostly the communist Democrats on this big spending. The federal government, as I said, is not supposed to be like that, and it's all fiat money out there, and that when they can convince people, especially Democrats, that a cut is really not a cut, it's just they're keeping the spending the same, and that when Americans decide that what was the way back during the founder said, when Americans decide that they can vote themselves a raise, that's what the problem is that we're into now. And again, all the fiat money out there is crazy. And again, like the last caller even said, good luck, America.
Well, you bring up some good points there again, and the fiat currency system that we have, which just means that the dollar is backed by government debt, creates a lot of problems and distortions out there. It would be, I'm more for a competitive currency, whether that's using gold or silver or Bitcoin one day or something along those lines. And I think when you look at the financial system, it's overregulated, whether it be from Dodd-Frank back during the Obama years, a lot of these, the Troper rule that from the CFPB that's going on right now, and other sort of the Basel III sort of area when you look at the amount of regulation. And even at the Fed, there's a lot of regulation on banking that's influencing American consumers, and the amount of credit that they have available, or the interchange banking, interchange fees as well, and credit cards and things of that nature. We've got a lot of areas that we should be reducing and deregulating. I'm hopeful the Trump administration could get there, because at the end of the day, I want to see free market capitalism. We haven't had that for a long time. If you look at the major industries of our economy, it's dominated by government, whether you think about healthcare, education, manufacturing. I mean, there's a lot of government at play trying to manipulate, distort what those markets are doing to get their intended outcomes versus what prices and the market process really allow to happen. That's how you get more efficiency, more economic growth, and more prosperity across the economy.
And Randy in Georgetown, Kentucky, Republican. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning. Thank you. Last year, there was a great big, huge inflation increase. And you guys never mentioned this. No one ever mentions it. And it was, you have to pay now so much higher insurance on your vehicles. You have to pay so much more taxes and licenses on your vehicle. When you get them repaired, they're so much higher. The used cars are so much higher because the new cars got a 35% increase because of the wages with the UAW. You talk about gangs. You talk about people ganging up on people to get more money. And then there's so much of this stuff that I could talk about. I know you won't give me time, but so many places that you're in error on all this economy. We've got to have a state tariffs and keep them on to keep businesses in this country and keep them coming back, so we don't have such a terrible supply chain situation like we have had and be subject to all these other countries. But it's just a nightmare of what you guys are doing. And we are a communist nation. They just allow us to have so much money to where it keeps us happy. Just think about it. We are a communist nation.
What do you think, Vance?
When you look at it's correct that the insurance rates have gone through the roof for housing, almost literally, because there's a lot of reasons for this. And one of those is that we've had higher and higher housing prices, which has been, in my view, kind of an asset bubble where a lot of that Federal Reserve money printing has went into housing over the last few years. And we're starting to see some of that deflate now as housing prices are coming back down. But whenever things are more expensive to rebuild and there are more people moving along the coasts and things of that nature, you're going to see more destruction and costlier destruction. And so insurance companies are having to raise those prices. At the same time, you're at the car part of that, car insurance. Those have also been going up dramatically, and a lot of that happened after COVID. When you had the lockdowns, you had the lack of import and exports whenever you had trade with other countries, and that really slowed down a lot of new car building across the economy, along maybe with some of the UAW, like you mentioned there. But what it did was it also increased demand for used cars, and that raised prices. So you had new car prices higher, used car prices higher, and so to replace those for wrecks or whatever may happen made it much more expensive for insurance companies. So what I would like to see is for us to reduce the cost of doing business here at home more than just going to tariffs. In fact, it should not go to tariffs at all. It should be looking at how do we reduce the cost of business here at home. And I think that's where pro-growth policies come in. It's about that investment that I mentioned earlier, full expensing in the one big beautiful bill. It's about lowering the corporate income tax rate. That wasn't done, but I think that should be on the table. It's about lowering government spending so that way you don't have more distortions throughout the economy. And ultimately, that's also going to mean less national debt and other things throughout the economy. Because at the end of the day, when you look at tariffs and you try to say, okay, we're going to help out this sector versus this sector, another sector is going to be hurt. There always are unintended consequences, and the opportunity cost is really high in those situations. And also, I would mention that, there's talk about the hollowing out of the Rust Belt and the manufacturing there that happened there, but that wasn't a result of trade. In fact, China joining the WTO was decades after we started losing employment in the manufacturing sector. And China didn't join WTO until 2001. And then you had NAFTA was in 1994. That was also well after the 1950s and 1960s where employment started to fall. And one other point here is that manufacturing output, how much production there actually is, continues to reach near record levels across the United States. And so what I would like to see is for us to stop those bad policies in those states that in America that drove out a lot of those businesses and manufacturing that was happening in the Rust Belt, including from the labor unions themselves. If we can get control of that, we would be in a much better situation to compete in manufacturing and manufacture more here in America relative to raising prices, raising cost through costly tariffs.
I want to ask you about the firing of the BLS commissioner after the jobs numbers were adjusted. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, so right after the jobs report came out, after that 260,000 revision, we had Trump come in, fire the BLS commissioner that was there based on basically the bias or the lack of good reporting and good estimating from his view, from President Trump's view on what was going on there. As I mentioned earlier, the percent changes in these revisions have actually been going down substantially since 1965. At the same time, I think that there are problems.
Explain why do they need to keep being revised? Why can't we have the right number at the very beginning?
Well, that would be great. But there are additional surveys. So what they do with these, the establishment report and the household survey, the establishment survey, they come into all the businesses, and a lot of businesses anyway, and they survey them of how many jobs that they're creating or letting go. And those survey response rates have declined dramatically from around 80% to 60%, in some cases 40% in some months, within the initial estimate and then the initial reports that are coming in. And so what they'll do over the next couple of months is they get more of those surveys that are coming in from those businesses, and then that helps them to revise their numbers. And so a big problem here is the survey responses are too low in the beginning. So how do we start to improve that at the end of the day? And I am hopeful that E.J. Antoni, who's the President Trump has nominated to be the next BLS commissioner, can help to get control of and make sure that we get the best response rates possible, which could include more automation, more ways to get this done more efficiently overall. I will say that I don't think this is a good look or a good time to just come in and fire a commissioner who ultimately doesn't have all of the control over how those data are collected or processed. And so it made a bad look whenever the president fired her on that day when it came out a couple weeks ago. And I'm hopeful that the new commissioner, whoever that may be, including E.J. Antoni, who I used to work with, I hired at the Texas Public Policy Foundation back in 2021 and worked for him for a while. And I think he has a good insight on a lot of the economy that's out there. I don't always agree with him on everything, but he's a good guy overall. But I think that there's going to be a big point here to make sure that these numbers don't look political. These numbers from BLS really influence a lot of the policy discussion, including what we talked about already today with the Fed and tariffs and everything else, because how weak or how strong the economy really matters. But it also influences states, because states also get money for Medicaid, unemployment, and things of that nature from the federal government and elsewhere in order to make payments on those programs based on those BLS data. So delaying the numbers or manipulating them in some other way that's not going to be a good look, for one thing, but also it's going to hurt the credibility of those numbers.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about the credibility beyond it being a bad look, because we got a text from California about, why would anybody in the business world have faith in the reliability and accuracy of economic data released by Trump administration officials? What impact do you
That's
think
going to
that'll,
be a good question.
that'll
I mean,
have on
it's something
businesses?
Right. No, it's a great question, and I think it's one that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that these have as much credibility and reliability as possible. I think there's also a good there's also good reason to consider alternatives and consider what the private sector is already putting out. Automatic data processing, ADP does their private sector jobs the Wednesday before the BLS Friday numbers come out every month. You also have Indeed, you have Home Base, you have all these other private sector indicators from the labor market that should be a part of this discussion. I mean, looking at just one data point doesn't give you a good picture on anything. That's just one data point. And so maybe this will also help us to get an idea of a broader range of indicators from the economy and understand that these government numbers are much more credible here in America than I would say anywhere else in the world. And let's make sure that we keep it that way. But we also need competition with these numbers. Anytime you have the government come in and monopolize a data or something else is not usually a good idea. And I don't think it's a good idea. I want more competition. And so maybe there's a way to get to that as well. And that will help to improve the credibility with the businesses and others that are out there so they can make the best decisions possible to increase profitability.
Let's talk to Billy in Wentzville, Missouri, Democrat. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Mimi. How you doing today?
Good.
Good. Just a couple of things. I just want to clear up a couple of things. Like, Trump keeps coming out and continuously saying that there's no tax on Social Security. That's not true. They still tax Social Security. However, you have up to a $6,000 deduction that you can write off. The other thing is he continuously comes out and says that America is bringing in all of these taxes, billions of dollars. But the thing of it is we're not bringing in money. We're just taxing other countries, and we're paying the difference on the taxes. So we're being ripped off, and he's lying to your faces every single time that he comes out there and continuously says that.
All right.
Well, first I would just say that tariffs are paid by Americans when we buy things and when we import them from other countries. So we pay them. There may be some effect on the foreign country that we're importing from. If they're getting less demand for their products because of those higher tariffs, well, then maybe they cut production and cut employment. And so there is some effect. But at the end of the day, a lot of that's going to be borne by people or will be borne by people, whether it's here or there. And I agree with you in the sense that those tariffs are raising costs, and those additional taxes that are being hiked by the Trump administration through tariffs, which they are going out and celebrating. It's unfathomable to me to see Republicans cheering the increases in taxes. Usually Republicans have been for lower taxes, more money in people's pockets, and this is the exact opposite, which is one reason why I think we need to get back to pro-growth policies. That's what I talk a lot about in my podcast, Let People Prosper, and other things, is really getting into this idea of reducing the size and scope of government, whether it's tariffs or other programs that are out there. We need more money in people's pockets to allow them to prosper on what they can do best versus government coming in and distorting all these other markets that are out there. And so while their intentions may be good, the results are such that we're not getting those intended results that they would like. And manufacturing in particular went down by the employment went down by 8,000 jobs just last month. And so we're seeing this not work even from manufacturing employment. And so I think we need to look at a different trajectory, a different road for policy that's more pro-growth minded versus this raising taxes and creating more distortions and uncertainty in the economy.
All right. That's Vance Ginn, former chief economist at the Office of Management and Budget during the first Trump administration, also founder and president of Ginn Economic Consulting. You can find him at vanceginn.com. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Have a great day.
Coming up later, a discussion on President Trump declaring federal control of Washington, D.C. police with R Street Institute's Jillian Snyder. But first, we go back to open forum. You can call in now. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. And it's 202-748-8002 for independents. We'll be right back.
There are many ways to listen to C-SPAN radio, anytime, anywhere. In the Washington, D.C. area, listen on 90.1 FM. Use our free C-SPAN Now app or go online to cspan.org/radio. On Sirius XM radio on channel 455, the TuneIn app, and on your smart speaker by simply saying, play C-SPAN radio. Hear our live call-in program, Washington Journal, daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Listen to House and Senate proceedings, committee hearings, news conferences, and other public affairs events live throughout the day. And for the best way to hear what's happening in Washington with fast-paced reports, live interviews, and analysis of the day, catch Washington Today, weekdays at 5 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern. Listen to C-SPAN programs on C-SPAN radio, anytime, anywhere. C-SPAN, democracy unfiltered.
I have been watching C-SPAN Washington Journal for over 10 years now.
This is a great format that C-SPAN offers. You're doing a great job. I enjoy hearing everybody's opinion.
I'm a huge C-SPAN fan. I listen every morning on the way to work.
I think C-SPAN should be required viewing for all three branches of government.
First of all, let me say I love C-SPAN and how y'all covered the hearings.
Thank you, everyone at C-SPAN, for allowing this interaction with everyday citizens.
It's an amazing show to get real opinions from real people.
Appreciate you guys' non-biased coverage.
I love politics, and I love C-SPAN because I get to hear all the voices.
You and C-SPAN show the truth.
Back to the universe for C-SPAN. It's the one essential news network.
Democracy is always an unfinished creation.
Democracy is worth dying for.
Democracy belongs to us all.
We are here in the sanctuary of democracy.
Great responsibilities fall once again to the great democracies.
American democracy is bigger than any one person.
Freedom and democracy must be constantly guarded and protected.
We are still, at our core, a democracy.
This is also a massive victory for democracy and for freedom.
Weekends bring you Book TV, featuring leading authors discussing their latest nonfiction books. Here's a look at what's coming up this weekend. At 8 p.m. Eastern, Stacey Abrams, a one-time Georgia state legislator and gubernatorial candidate, talks with former Librarian of Congress Carla Hayden about her latest fictionalized thriller, Coded Justice. And then at 9:15 p.m. Eastern, Michael Grinbaum gives an inside look at the glamorous Condé Nast publishing empire, the people who crafted its publications, and the standards they set for American culture with his book, Empire of the Elite. And at 10:15 p.m. Eastern, Book TV takes you to Freedom Fest, an annual libertarian festival held this year in Palm Springs, California, to hear three authors discuss their works. We'll talk with Wrong Speak Publishing founder Adam Coleman, attorney Kent Heckenlively, and computer information technologist Sean Worthington. Watch Book TV every weekend on C-SPAN 2 and find a full schedule on your program guide or watch online anytime at booktv.org.
In our earlier discussion with Zakir Tamiz about his full biography of Charles Sumner, he discussed his differences with Professor David Herbert Donald on the same subject. On December the 24th, 1995, Professor Donald talked about his book called Lincoln on the television program Book Notes. David Donald died in 2009 at age 88. During his teaching career, which he finished as a professor of history at Harvard, Professor Donald was praised for his Lincoln book by historian Eric Foner. Quote, "It is often considered the best single volume of Lincoln ever. It's the most balanced of the biographies out there," said Foner.
We discuss author David Herbert Donald and his book Lincoln on this episode of Book Notes Plus with our host Brian Lamb. Book Notes Plus is available wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now app.